Hey, Adam.
Yo.
You could play this.
I could.
But wouldn't you rather do this?
I would. Peter, you could play this.
Yeah.
But wouldn't you rather play this?
I think so.
Yeah, me too.
Hey, Adam.
Yes.
You could play like this.
Is that Messiaen?
I'm making a messiaen of it. But wouldn't you rather do it like this?
You know, I think I would.
And that's a good choice. It's your choice.
It's corny. It's a corny video. I'm Adam Menace.
And I'm Peter Martin.
And you're listening to the You'll Hear podcast.
Music advice coming at you.
It's your decision to listen to this podcast.
And it's a good decision. It is a very
Peter's
good
making
decision.
fun of me. If you don't know, Peter's making fun of
I'm
one of my videos that just came out. Thank you, Peter, for grounding me to the earth.
Well, congrats on the millions. Now we can say we're getting into the millions of views of that. That would be the heart melter video that you have lovingly presented to the world. Check it out on YouTube Shorts, Instagram Shorts, Talk. Check it out over on the Talk. How do you get there? TikTok.com? What's happening with that?
TikTok.com. Yeah, you go to www.tiktok.com.
It's a great video. Really based around triads, plagal cadences, beautiful sounding piano, beautiful sounding voice. Congrats, man.
Thank you. You know, and that video is based on all of some like good ideas to play with chords.
Yeah.
And today's episode of the You'll Hear podcast is all about maybe some things not to do when you're playing chords, and maybe some ways that you can up your chord game.
That's right. And I think it's important for us to remember sometimes folks chafe a little bit or bristle at things.
They do bristle.
They bristle, especially if they're in Bruxelles, Belgium. Big shout out to Belgium.
Thanks for the beer and the chocolates.
We love. Sometimes I got to tell the story about the $26 Belgian beer you tricked me into having.
I know the story. I was there.
Yeah. But no, so we're calling this 3 biggest chord mistakes. And I know a lot of people are like, why is that so negative? I want to know what I should be doing instead of what I shouldn't be doing. You know, because a lot of folks are like, I already know how to play bad. Tell me how to play good. But I use this in my practice all the time. I think it's an important sort of overall framework that we can use in thinking about what we don't want to do. So like mistakes we don't want to make to guide us towards the promised land of what we do. And I think chords being potentially such a kind of esoteric area in terms of like one-handed voicings, two-handed voicings, are we comping behind? Are we playing 3 zones? And all these different sort of questions is a perfect sort of place to look at this.
Yeah, and if mistakes makes you bristle, if thinking about it that negatively makes you bristle, just consider this as like some boundaries to put on your practice, even just to get some new ideas. But I do think that these 3 things are common ways that
these 3 things, short and simple.
These are common ways that beginners and intermediate players can kind of get stuck in their chords. And there are other options for, I think, the sounds you're getting at. And let's get right into number 1, Peter. So the first big mistake that you might make with your chord. That's very pretty. This sounds like a Studio Ghibli movie. It sounds like The Legend of Zelda.
Should we check this out? Can we see this? Can we see a visual? Look at that.
There it is. Key of C. We've got some flack about key of C.
Right.
We don't have any other options. So
well, we do. You could put it in the key of D. But that would be
good, but then we're just adding accidentals to the key signature.
This is an atonal situation. So, but basically we've got, look at the keyboard at the bottom, if you don't like the top. So I've got a D major 7 root position. So you might say, oh, the first big mistake is that it's root position. But root position is not always bad.
No.
Or at least not only root position, but building off of the root.
As we'll talk about later.
Is that 2 different things? That is 2 different things.
Yes, I
root
think
position.
So.
Okay. But the idea is here that we're going to take this, which is fine. Like there's a world where that left-handed voicing works nicely, even with the root on the bottom in this kind of alto tenorish range.
Yeah.
But what we don't want to do is boom, where everything is just stacked on top of each other double, taking away the power and the beauty.
Yeah, if you are, and you know, in certain situations, obviously this works great as orchestration. However, if you're playing, you know, jazz piano and you're playing like a 2-5-1 in the key of D major and you do this, right?
Yeah.
You do. big stacked seventh chords.
Nothing sounds stage band like that.
I'm just doubling, like this by itself is fine, but to double what you're doing there, not great. So
this is not like the Doublemint commercial. Twice as nice.
What you can do with this is, no, it's not. Don't double your pleasure. It doesn't double your fun. What you can do with this is to take some of the notes, which is what you did in the intro. Yeah. Take some of the notes that are here, and you can move it up the octave. So the C here, right? The C, it's right in the middle. We can take that up an octave, and even just that here. Now this is, we'll call this an A flat major 7, right? Just for our purposes today. But just that up an octave, right? That C, we got a whole new thing, right? We got a whole different kind of chord. And then don't forget that, like, if you're playing an A flat major 7 chord in the key of A flat here, you have all of the other extensions. Right. Maybe this, right?
And that's, look, you start to think, oh, you must be doubling something. You're not. These are still additive.
No, nothing's double.
And think about how strong. So that was the last voicing you played there, right? Yeah. So it's like a A flat major 7 6 9.
That's right. Yeah.
Now I'm just gonna add one doubling note. That's the original third. Like some people might be like, oh, that sounds pretty good, but so much weaker. And I mean weaker. It's all subjective, but I think that this has such a more interesting. You wouldn't think it would make that much difference, but this has such more ethereal kind of modern sound. I don't know, what would you call that?
Well, in general, it is a little slicker, a little more angular, a little more modern. And it doesn't mean, again, that you can never double notes or that you should never double the third specifically, but doubling the thirds and the sevenths, especially if you have other notes in there, it can be very thick. What it does is, like, it thickens out the overtone series enough that it actually starts to cancel and thin out the sound of the chord. Now there are exceptions, like the Barry Harris chords, but notice that these are very low and there's only thirds and sevenths doubled here, right? That's it. There's no other thing. If you put a bunch of other stuff in here, it gets very murky to the point where it just doesn't mean anything.
Right.
So the doubling of the thirds and sevenths should be done in very, I think, particular circumstances.
Yeah, and then other things that we don't have as one of our official chord mistakes that people will think about, and sometimes we talk about these, are like A flat major. Okay, if you're going to leave something out, like, what do we leave out? The fifth is probably something safe to kind of leave out. And so you might be like, well, why do you have the fifth so prominent instead of doubling the third? Then why does that work? We're looking at these kind of like inner shapes. That C minor triad, all those fourths up there, the nice open fifth. So it's never just like one thing that makes or breaks it. These are guidelines. But I think that once you start to hear the difference between them and the pros and cons sometimes for different situations, it can really open up things.
And then when you're not doubling the thirds and especially when you're not just ham fisting double whatever, when you do start doubling notes, it becomes a choice, an artistic choice to bring them out.
And it's not a good choice.
It is a great choice, but because you can do things like this, right? So this has doubled notes, right? But look what's doubled. So here's a C major 9 chord, right?
Yeah.
I've got C, E, B, D, G, D. So our 9 here is doubled, but this actually makes it pop. Like, so there we could do this, or we could do this.
Yep.
But if we want that 9 on top, now we have it filled up. Listen to the difference between having the 9 doubled or having the third doubled.
Yeah.
This is corny somehow.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but this is cornier. That is glassier.
Yeah.
That cuts better, and it sort of highlights the notes that we want to highlight in the chord.
Interesting though, like if you do that was your last one.
Yeah.
But we do have the third in, a little corny. But look, move that top 9th down. A little better, right?
Oh yeah. Well, now it is a little better. Yeah. The balance
even though we're still
of it
doubling
is a
the
little
third.
Better. Yeah.
Still not as strong, I don't think, as this.
Agreed.
Like when you double the third or double the fifth or double the root, any of those primary, especially with like a major 7, major 6, 9 thing, like that's going to bring, it's going to bring prominence to one of those, in this case, thirds, in a way that you might not want. Now, if that's sort of the melody, like, and you're doing some kind of inner thing, then you would want that. But like, there's that, and then there's like like that's screaming out.
Yeah, I mean, you can hear the difference even if we just took away the third here. That's with double thirds. How much crystal clear is that?
And that's not jumping out as much as when you're doubling it because of that octave. Like when you have an octave or a double octave, that top note of that octave, especially if it's sort of a 1, 3, 5, one of those is going to really jump out.
Yeah, true.
And kind of be a little bit incongruent sometimes, I think is what it is.
Our next big mistake might be a revelation, especially for like players that have been playing a long time, and especially if you grew up sort of when we grew up. And when we grew up, there was a lot of pianists who were teaching that you should never play rooted voicings, especially when there's a bass player involved. Right. And if you look at the evidence of the greatest piano players in history, it just doesn't add up.
Oscar Peterson.
Roots on his voicings a lot of the times.
Wynton Kelly.
Roots on his voicing a lot of times. Not all the time.
Red Garland.
Definitely roots on his voicing. Bud
Frederick
Powell.
Chopin.
Roots like crazy. Bud Powell, Thelonious Monk, Hank Jones, like McCoy Tyner, you name them, there is roots going on all over the place.
Yep.
You know, it's a big part of it. So, you know,
it's like understanding what they sound like when they work, how they're going to affect the music. And this is bass player or no bass player.
Bass player or no bass player. It actually doesn't matter. What you don't want to do is to really like you don't want to walk a bass line when you have a bass player.
Right.
You don't want to sustain big double octaves on a big piano. But like Peter, let's play a C blues here.
Okay.
I'm gonna do a chorus without roots, and then I'm gonna do a chorus with roots.
You want me to walk?
You walk a bass line. 1, 2, 3, and. This is no roots on my chords. It's gonna sound good.
And it's a good.
All right, I'm gonna add roots, and let me know if this bothers you.
Not only does it not bother me, I enjoy it.
It's good, right? It fills out the chord. It's actually harder to hear on the Rhodes sound. You try it, Peter. You try it.
Rootless first. Go to roots.
So both sound great. Like you need to have both is the point. There's been this sort of myth that you can never have roots on your chord when there's a bass player, that you should only be playing rootless voicings when there's a bass player.
Right.
And it's just not true. And in fact, it just sounds so good to a lot of times, especially in this baritone region, to add roots to your voicing. There's this sound and then there's this sound.
Yeah.
And if you're on an acoustic piano especially, you are not going to be able to overpower a bass player unless you're really banging hard with double octaves way down low. That baritone region played with dynamics.
Yeah.
Even down here, you know, you're going to be fine, man. You're going to be fine.
Yeah. And I mean, really, what about a combination? That's kind of where the magic.
Well, that's what actually happens. We're not advocating for never playing rootless voicings at all. Don't make that mistake, because they are extremely handy. But that's not the only story, right? That's not the only thing that we can do. We can definitely tell a story with some lower voicings with roots on them. It fills out the chord. It just makes your chords a little bit punchier. I highly recommend listening to players like Hank Jones, like Bud Powell, and Thelonious Monk, and what they do with roots, and many, many others. McCoy Tyner.
Yeah. And when you're going root, especially with solo piano, where you can kind of control this a little bit more, once you go rootless, that can be a really special moment, right?
Totally.
Like that can be a kind of dramatic thing. And that's why it's like, you know, or even comping when there's a bass player, I think there's a lot of sort of register or melodic, you know, content derived stuff reasons why you would leave the root for a second and come back as part of your dramatic kind of chordal story.
Yeah. And don't be worried if you're overlapping with the bass player, because they have a whole different timbre than we do, right? So they are a lot bigger, of a sub bass sound than we have, unless you're on. The only caveat here is if you are on a keyboard with a bad piano sound and a big amp, and you've got the bass cranked on the amp, you can be annoyingly covering up the bass.
Right, start to kind of weave on top.
So just be conscious of what you're doing. Make sure to always play with dynamics. If you're on acoustic piano, you're almost certainly good to go as long as you're listening.
Number one, listen.
That's right. All right, our third biggest mistake for chords.
Okay, so this is what I demonstrated in the beginning. This is not using voice leading. So the most obvious manifestation of that is we're jumping around all over the place, not for kind of dramatic flair types of reasons, which there may be a time to do that, but we're doing it because we only know certain voicings in certain the permutations. We're limited. So in other words, if I go F sharp minor here and then I'm like B7 and maybe I only know this voicing, which actually would work pretty good, but for some reason maybe I jump up here to the B7 sharp 9 flat 13 because that's where I think it'll sound good. And that is a good voicing. But not after that. Unless I just want it to be a little bit of a random jumbled thing. So it's like using voice leading where it takes us to some uncomfortable places maybe with our hands, but some comfortable places in terms of tension, resolution, drama within the voicing.
And you could take it one step further and say it's a mistake not to use melodies with your voicings, with your comping.
Right.
So,
and not just on top. I mean, top is the most obvious in your entry
anywhere
point.
Really.
Yeah.
You can use melodies. I mean, when you're doing it right, every voice that you're playing should be its own melody.
Exactly.
That's a tall order for most people. But even if you just start, I mean, think about the way like someone like Emmett Cohen comps.
Yep.
There's melodies happening all the time when he's comping, when he's playing chords. So you could, like, I think where most people sit, Peter, is if we do another C blues, if you want to walk a bass line for me. So this is where most people sit, right? They have a voicing with the root on top. Nothing wrong with this. This is a great sound, right?
It's your sound. It's a great sound.
Oh, he's making fun of me again. But, like, making melodies... Not just with chords too, but putting single note lines in there. Not in the bass, Peter. Not in the bass. What are you doing?
I got excited.
Let's start this. Peter keeps playing melodies while I'm trying to demonstrate it. Let's try. Let's do a C blues, and this is what you might typically hear when you're just kind of stuck on the one voicing without any melodic content. 1, 2, 3, and. There's nothing wrong with this again. This is a sound. These little melodies here just staying within one place. It's a decision. It's your decision.
It's a good decision.
It's a good decision. But you could also do things like add melodic content. It doesn't have to be just with chords. It can be actual melodies. Again, I'm comping. I'm hearing an imaginary solo.
We'll call that solo snuffleupagus.
So all of those things, just letting at least at first, letting even just that top voice sort of dictate a melody to you, can be just a really fun practice to add to your practice schedule for comping.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there's ways too to think about, we don't have to go too deep into this, but this hopefully just to get some of you kind of thinking next level as you're practicing, even like, so if we're in C, like if we go 3, 6, 2, 5, 1,
just that.
All those kind of melodic things on top, but you can also think about,
those little melodies.
Yeah, but remember you mentioned at the beginning of like ideally all voices being melodies. So if we say a 6-note voicing like this, It is a tall order to think about each one independently, like resolving and becoming its own thing. But a little trick on this is like just take 3 and 3, for instance. You could do 2 and 2 as well, but we'll go 3 and 3. So there's E minor 7, what is that? E minor 11 kind of thing. And then I'm just thinking about these as triads. That's a D triad. So like, what triad could I go to for A? And what, for A7.
Right. It gives you, it naturally gives you voice leading when you think about it.
Yeah, because you don't want every note to move. So if we go E minor to C minor in the left hand, D major in the right hand, to B flat minor, and then maybe do, C major and D minor. And then, yeah, exactly. So that's like that kind of a thing.
Love that root on there too, buddy.
Yeah. Well, then we're not making 2 mistakes at the same time.
That's right. So,
Happy Halloween, by the way.
Happy Halloween. Okay. So again, if the word mistake is brustling you, just consider these a little bit of guardrails for your practice time so that you're trying new things, and just know there are other ways to do it besides just doubling every note in a chord. There are other ways to do it besides only using rootless voicings. And there are other ways to do it besides just being as close as possible with no melodic content. You can practice, oh, that sounds great. You can practice all of these other ways to come. I think we should leave it here. I think the ghosts have been
Happy
invaded.
Halloween, y'all. Yeah. A week late.
Oh, spooky.
Spooky. Till next time.
You'll hear it.